Welcome to Module 5, where we're going to build on everything we've done so far and explore ways to get through our debt faster and faster. Congratulations on getting this far and sticking with it. So we've covered a lot of topics like organizing our debts and freeing up money to apply to our debts. But today, we're going to cover strategies for making our money work as fast as possible. We'll also look at other options that might be a better fit for your specific situation to get beyond debt and back on the path to financial freedom. We're going to go into a lot of detail again on how to pay off debt fast, but it's important to reflect on what got us into debt in the first place. Perhaps a medical bill, school, a big purchase, or maybe our home. Or maybe it was just our lifestyle and spending that we couldn't sustain. Whatever it was, none of what we'll cover today is going to make a difference if we haven't changed the root cause of our debt. That's why we focus so much time on how to stop adding to our debt by getting our expenses below our income. We explored ways to give ourselves more breathing room, more capacity to pay off our debts, while saving some money for emergencies. If we can make these changes permanent and integrate them into our lives, we can avoid debt in the future. But in the end, it's up to each of us to stick with the plan. So maybe you want to stick with cash envelopes or cut up credit cards. Whatever keeps you on track, use it. Many of us have heard stories of people taking giant steps to pay off debt. People who are fed up with paying high monthly payments and want to be doing things with their lives other than making payments to a bank. And so it's possible. It's possible to pay off $89,000 in under 2 years, or $8,000 in 90 days, or $45,000 or more. Whatever your debt is, you can be free of it. That's what today is all about, exploring options to get out from under debt fast. So here's what we'll cover. How to build on your work thus far. We'll discuss a powerful payoff strategy which you can start using today. We'll revisit some common options like debt consolidation, and I'll explain some others, such as debt counseling and debt management. Then I want to discuss debt age and the dangers of ignoring it. I'll also explain what debt settlement is, and then I'll cover bankruptcy and how to evaluate it. And as always, we'll have an activity so that you can take the next steps right away. So we have a lot of topics to cover, and we'll cover them based on where you're at today. If you're able to manage your debts, but you want to make more progress, using a paydown strategy can help you make short work of it. If you're able to make your payments but barely, or struggle to get everything covered month after month, then you could benefit from consolidation or debt counseling. And it could make sense to get your debts into a debt management program so that you can get a little breathing room and stay current. You might also receive a defined timeline for paying off your debts, which can be a huge relief. And lastly, if you're overwhelmed, if you can't make your necessary payments or are so far behind catching up is hopeless, I'll cover some other options which could provide you with the relief and the second chance that you need. We'll start by discussing strategies when your debts are manageable, which means that you're in control. You can decide how you want to tackle your debts. If you're struggling or in trouble, you may need some assistance, and that will likely mean using one or more of the programs listed. But there will be many parts of these programs that will be dependent on agencies or courts. So things like qualifying for a program and timetables to get things done could vary greatly. Now, there are a number of debt paydown strategies, but I'm going to cover one in detail here, probably the most popular one, the money momentum method. For this to work, we take all of our debts and list them in order from smallest balance to largest balance. We make minimum payments to each of them, but we take all of the extra money from slashing our expenses and from extra income that we focused on in the last module and apply it each month to the smallest debt. And once we pay it off, we roll over all of that money and apply it towards the next debt, and so on. That's why this method is also known as power pay, or the debt snowball, because the power of our payments grows each time we pay off a debt. Let's look at an example. So the first step in using the money momentum method is to list out all of our debts in order from the smallest balance to the largest balance, like our credit card with a $480 balance, and then the $1,500 one, and then the $5,000 one, and then our car loan at $12,000, and lastly our student loan with $23,000. It's worth noting that we're going to leave our mortgage out. Next, we're going to make our minimum required payment for each debt, and so we have those budgeted for each month. But we're also going to apply the extra money that we freed up by cutting expenses and raising cash in the previous module. We'll pay our minimum payment on each debt, but we're going to apply all of that extra money to the smallest debt only. That extra cash is going to help us knock out the smallest credit card balance pretty quickly. Once that first credit card is paid off, we're going to have each of the remaining minimum payments ready to go. But now, in our budget, we still have the minimum payment available from the first credit card and the extra cash that we freed up. So we'll make all of our required minimum payments, but we'll apply that leftover minimum payment and the extra cash to the smallest debt, the $1,500 credit card. That will knock out that credit card fast. We repeat the process again. We make all of the remaining minimum payments, but we take the payment left over from the first credit card and the second credit card and the original freed up cash and apply it to the last credit card. With large payments at this point being made to your smallest debts, you'll be seeing lots of progress and another debt knocked out. And again, repeat the process. Minimum payments and all of that extra money going towards the smallest remaining debt. Before long, the car is paid off too. And then, of course, you're just left with one student loan, and by this time, you are making huge payments toward it, watching it shrink until it's gone for good. This method is powerful and it works, in part because each time you eliminate a debt, you're reducing your obligations, the number of payments that you have to make, giving you more breathing room each month. But more importantly, because we knock out some of the debts right away, we get to feel the satisfaction of getting free from a debt. We get to cross it off our debt inventory list. Shortly after that, we'll cross off another. You'll see and feel that progress, and before you know it, you'll be crossing things off regularly until there's nothing left. Now, in my opinion, the best part of this strategy is that it sets you up for the future. While focused on debt, you may have worried about falling behind in life, maybe giving up hope for a normal retirement. But if you stick with the money momentum strategy, once you knock out all of your debts, what you're left with is good, positive cash flow. And since you've also learned how to live without those payments each month, you can use that cash flow to help make up lost ground. You can put healthy chunks of money each month into your savings account for a future purchase, or supercharging your retirement fund again. If you stick with it, keep living within the budget, you can make up significant ground, be free of stress, change your lifestyle for good, and finally start seeing those dreams become realities. So, there's a worksheet for this module which you can use to set up your own money momentum schedule. Let's walk through how to use it. First, you'll enter how much money you freed up in the last module as you cut expenses and maximized your income. Enter the amount of extra money above and beyond the required minimum payments for your debts here. For example, let's say you can commit to $200 more than the required payments. Next, you'll want to list out all of your debts, as I mentioned, from the smallest balance to the largest. You'll probably want to use your debt inventory worksheet from Module 1 to help fill this out. Enter each debt, your current remaining balance, and the minimum payment due, which you might have to find on your monthly statement. For example, your small MasterCard balance, then your personal loan, and so on. Then, take the $200 in extra money and add it to the smallest debt's minimum payment. In this case, the MasterCard payment of $25. Enter the new payment in the column next to it, $225. This is the monthly payment that you'll make towards this credit card until it's paid off. It won't be long before that MasterCard is paid off, only a couple of months. Then cross it off your list. Once it's done, take the $225 that you are paying each month towards it and add it to the next monthly payment, the $150 payment towards the personal loan. $225 plus $150 is $375, and write that in the new payment box. You'll pay this amount towards the personal loan each month until it's paid off, and then just repeat the process. Another great thing about money momentum is that it doesn't depend on anyone else. You can use this strategy today, and as I mentioned, you don't have to get permission from your lenders or apply to a program. You're in complete control. And if you're using the 2% rule that we discussed in the last module and freeing up a little more cash each month, say $50, then you can apply that each month too, making it even more powerful and plowing through debts even faster. All of these little things add up to a big impact. Now let's talk about what to do when your debts are still difficult to manage. when you might be barely able to get by or sometimes falling a little short. These are options that might help if you need a little extra help. Now, we discussed debt consolidation in some detail in the last module, and consolidation has its advantages. You can apply for a new loan, often a personal loan, to consolidate all of your debts into one fixed monthly payment. Sometimes you'll get a better interest rate, or be able to spread the loan out over a longer period of time to get a lower payment. However, there are some cons. If you have a lot of loans and are using up your credit capacity, or if you've been a little behind and your credit history is mediocre, you might not even be able to qualify for a new loan. And if you do, you might lose some benefits by replacing certain types of loans. For example, consolidating a federal student loan might eliminate flexible payment options afforded to students. And if you consolidate credit cards with a secured loan like a home equity loan, that credit card debt might now put your home at risk of foreclosure. So there are a number of things to consider. You can also explore peer-to-peer lending, which is getting a loan from other individuals, usually online. Even though you may need several $1,000s in peer-to-peer lending, it will usually come in very small pieces from thousands of people that contribute very small amounts. This type of loan allows you to avoid going to the normal financial institutions like a bank, and the amounts you can apply for could be more than adequate, with typical loans ranging from $1,000 to $40,000 and lasting from 1 to 5 years. Now keep in mind, with this type of lending, lots of different types of people apply, so default rates can vary and you might have to pay a higher interest rate. And another option is to explore a loan from your employer-sponsored retirement plan. Some employer plans have a provision to allow you to access some of your money in the form of a loan. And like any loan, there is usually some interest charged, but the bigger consideration might be losing out on investment returns. When the money isn't in your retirement account, it won't grow if investments do well. These loans are usually repaid over 5 years through payroll deductions. This means that they'll automatically take the payment due from your paycheck before you get paid. So you'll need to expect a lower paycheck and make appropriate budget and living adjustments. Also, keep in mind that you're only allowed one loan at a time, so if it's not enough, or if you end up acquiring some new debts later, you won't be able to take out another loan until the first one is paid off. And lastly, think about your job situation. If you leave your company or if you're let go, any balance remaining on the loan can become due immediately. Some plans may allow you to repay the loan with payments, but if you're laid off, you may have no choice and end up losing the money from your account for good. Retirement plan loans are definitely an option, but they have their risks and should be considered carefully against other consolidation options. Now, I mentioned this before, consolidation loans can look like an obvious solution, but they can quickly make things worse if you're tempted to use a credit card again to make a few purchases. If small balances start to rack up, you might find yourself in the same place with credit card debt, but this time combined with a consolidation loan. Not only could the monthly cost be too much to handle, but you might not have any options left at that point. So it's critical to make sure that a consolidation loan is affordable and that you have your spending and budget in a sustainable place. Let's dive into debt counseling and debt management. I bring them up together because they are very closely related. If you're interested in either, you generally will go into a debt and credit counseling company or agency. They will usually provide both services, but you'll start out with a counselor that will look at your specific situation. Then, if you want to, or if it's appropriate for you, you can proceed into debt management at the same place. So, what is debt counseling? Debt counseling is simply working with a trained counselor who will get to know your financial situation and work with you to uncover the root causes of your financial difficulties. This is generally the first step in seeking outside help, because it might just take someone to help you work out a budget or brainstorm ideas. You might just need an unbiased person to look at your cash flow, or you might need a bit more involvement and have them show you what you need to do. Working with a counselor will ultimately result in a personalized budget to hopefully stabilize your financial situation and avoid more drastic measures like bankruptcy. If you need a credit and debt counselor, check out the National Foundation for Credit Counseling's website at nfcc.org to find one of their certified counselors. As you go through the counseling process, you may learn that debt management will make a big difference for you. If you're really struggling with the debt payments, maybe the payments are just beyond what you can handle. Management might get you a lower payment. Your counselor will help explain what budget you'll need to stick to if you put your debts into a management program. Keep in mind, you'll have to agree and commit to the budget that you design with your counselor throughout the debt management process. Debt management is the service where the agency will negotiate and modify your debts, primarily credit cards, to get a lower interest rate and payment. They'll collect a single monthly payment from you and then send the appropriate payments to each individual account. This saves you the hassle of managing and paying multiple accounts. Just having one payment might make it worthwhile, but their ability to get lower rates means that it will likely require less money each month over what you're paying now. This isn't debt consolidation, although it can feel like it since you just have one payment each month. Now, most plans last 5 years, but your debts will be paid off at the end of the program. One other thing that you must be aware of, to get these lower rates and for a fixed monthly payment to work, you can't add any new charges to these debts. That means that any debts such as your credit cards that are part of the management program will be closed. So you won't have access to those funds, and it's generally against the terms of the deal to get new cards or new loans during this time. That's why being able to stick to the budget is extremely important. Agencies do charge a fee to administer the program, usually $30 to $50 a month, but you're often in better shape even with the fee. However, if you want to reach out to your credit card companies on your own, negotiate terms and payments, you can potentially do all of this yourself, but you still might be better off using an agency. So we've covered some options when debts are difficult to manage, but let's discuss what you can do if you can't see any way to get them under control. This is for situations when you can't make the minimum payment, or maybe you're far behind on payments and there just isn't enough cash flow to address the debts. So the first question is, should you pay the debt? Well, that might seem a bit strange. I'm going to leave any moral or ethical questions up to you. However, I ask it because based on the rules and the impacts that debts can have, paying it might cause more problems than it solves. First, let's address the statute of limitations. Now, I'm not a lawyer or giving legal advice, but the statute of limitations is the time limit where a creditor can sue you and use the court system to help recover the debt. Typically, they would get a judgment to try and garnish your wages. The limitation varies by state, so check on the laws in your state and the laws specific to your types of debt. But let's use an example here of 4 years. If you haven't had any activity on your debt for 4 years, no payments or contacts, and the statute of limitations has run out, a creditor, or likely a debt collector at this point, can still contact you and try to collect, but they might not have any legal options to force you to pay. Another consideration is your credit history. Most items fall off your credit report 7 years after the last activity. So, combined with the statute of limitations, debts that are old and have had no activity on them might be difficult to collect and might not be showing up on your credit report at all. Keep in mind, this doesn't mean that you don't owe it or that you won't be contacted about it, but it might not affect you very much. Now, you might be thinking that you're in the clear after a certain amount of time passes, so I need to bring up the concept of re-aging. I mentioned before that things like the statute of limitations, sometimes 4 years, and your credit history, usually 7 years, are based on your last activity. So if you create new activity on a really old debt, you could re-age it, or start the statute of limitations over, or have it pop back up on your credit report. This can happen a lot, especially by accident. So what can re-age a debt? Well, just acknowledging the validity of a debt can be considered activity. That's why it's important, especially when dealing with a collector, to not accept responsibility for a debt right off the bat. You can take down the debt information and say you'll look into it, but it's generally a good idea to not say things like, yeah, I do owe that still, or yeah, that belongs to me. Get the information, but don't accept responsibility until you can take a look at it and decide what strategy is appropriate for you. And then there are the types of things that you would expect to be activity, such as making a payment or just agreeing to and entering into a payment plan. You might be tempted to do that as a show of good faith, but it could reset the clock too. Some of the other things are if you use the account again, like buy something on it, or if you make a settlement offer to close it out, that could have it show up again too. So since I mentioned settlement offer, I want to explain what that is. A settlement offer would be part of a debt settlement. Debt settlement is often closely tied to bankruptcy. If we can't pay off an entire debt, we'll generally offer a smaller amount to settle the debt. This is pretty hit or miss though, so it's common to try debt settlement first, but to pursue bankruptcy anyway. Debt settlement is simply trying to settle a debt for a one-time, reduced amount. The lender or debt owner will consider the matter closed, and the benefit to you is that you won't have to pay the full amount. While this might sound like a good deal, this is typically only an option when the borrower can't foresee ever being able to pay back the full debt. And a lender would only accept a settlement if they believe that they would never be able to collect more than the settlement, so both parties really need to be in dire straits. While you can call your creditors and offer or negotiate a settlement on your own, many people use a settlement company which negotiates on your behalf. There's no guarantee that it'll work, and because settlement companies usually charge their fee up front, results can vary widely. In fact, there are many companies that advertise this service, even promising results, but never deliver any value. Settlement offers do result in the debt being satisfied, but not paid as required or as expected, and so it will negatively impact your credit history. However, being far enough behind on debt payments to make settlements attractive will probably mean that your credit history has already taken a hit. Keep in mind, any part of the balance that is not paid could be considered income and might be taxable. The catch-22 here is that to offer a settlement, you probably need cash to make a lump sum payment, and that just might not be the reality. That's why it's common that a debt settlement is followed up with or even replaced with a bankruptcy. So you've probably heard of bankruptcy or have an idea of what it is. Bankruptcy is generally a legal process to relieve you of your obligations to your debts because of your inability to pay them back or lack of assets to cover them. Now, there are different types of bankruptcies, and we'll cover two here, but they are similar in many ways. For example, when all of the options we've covered so far just aren't going to be enough to be able to keep up with your debts. Or maybe realistically, you can't see a way that you'd ever be able to pay them off. Bankruptcy eliminates some or all of your legal responsibility to those debts, and it can stop collectors. It can interrupt foreclosure processes or repossessions, and it could end wage garnishments and keep your utilities on. But bankruptcy is not a cure-all. It does not get rid of every debt, such as student loans, nor does it mean you'll be able to keep every asset, like a car or a home. And while it may give some co-signers temporary relief, the process will relieve you of the legal obligation, but not necessarily a co-signer. There are two main types of bankruptcies that apply to individuals, Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Chapter 7 is called a liquidation or a straight bankruptcy because it settles and eliminates debts virtually instantly. Chapter 13 is called reorganization because your debt payments are restructured by the courts, which you will pay for a certain length of time. The result is that unsecured debts are forgiven, but they're restructured in Chapter 13. Now, Chapter 7 filing can take 4 to 6 months to fully complete, while a Chapter 13 will take 3 to 5 years to get through the repayment period. Student loans, as well as some other obligations like child support and alimony, are not eliminated. In Chapter 7, you could lose assets if there are enough of them to cover parts of your debts. Cars and homes would either need to be paid as normal, or they would still be repossessed. Chapter 13 is more for trying to keep assets like a car or a home, and to restructure the payments to avoid repossession or foreclosure. Co-debtors, or co-signers, would not be off the hook in Chapter 7. In fact, creditors could and probably will pursue payments from co-signers. However, in Chapter 13, co-signers would not be contacted while the restructured plan is in place. Chapter 7 also stays on your credit report longer, usually 10 years after the bankruptcy is approved. Chapter 13 stays on for 7 years. Chapter 7 is probably more appropriate if you don't have many assets and have mostly unsecured debts like credit cards or personal loans. Chapter 13 is for people with assets that are trying to keep them but need the loans modified significantly. And I also want to mention that the rules have changed over the past few years, making applying for bankruptcy harder. For Chapter 7 filings, there's a means test to determine if you qualify to file, which varies by state. I think it's also worth noting that retirement accounts are generally left out of bankruptcy, so you shouldn't have to worry about losing your retirement savings if you choose to file. Now, I want to spend a bit more time on bankruptcy because I feel like many financial experts suggest that bankruptcy is two things. First, many make bankruptcy out to be some sort of awful thing in and of itself. It's a nuclear option that should only be considered as an absolute last resort. Second, many make it sound as if it's something that will ruin your life and stick with you forever. I'd like to address both of these points. First, not only do I not think that bankruptcy is substantially worse than many of the other options out there, but I don't think that it should even be avoided sometimes until other options are exhausted. For example, why spend years making payments towards debts that you might never be able to fully repay? Or even if you can, why delay saving for retirement if you can have a clean slate years earlier? We all only have a certain amount of time to work, earn, and save. If I dismiss bankruptcy when it's an option because I feel like I can make good on my debts, but I spend 5 or 10 years getting back to even, those are 5 or 10 years that I wasn't saving. In many cases, I think bankruptcy should be considered with all of the other available alternatives at the outset. Second, many people have declared bankruptcy. Of course, there are celebrities and billionaires alike that have simply used it as a financial tool. Many of America's iconic companies have gone through bankruptcy. Yes, a personal bankruptcy will stay in your credit report longer than most other information, 10 years versus the typical 7. However, there's no outward visible sign that you've done it. No notices sent to your family and friends. In many cases, you'll be offered secured and even sometimes unsecured credit cards immediately after discharging your debts. The reason is because you're often back to zero, with little to no debt to your name anymore. And in many cases, credit card companies are comforted knowing that you can't declare bankruptcy again, at least for years down the road. Imagine that you're working, earning money, and you could get by if you just didn't have the weight of payments for your debts. Without your debts, maybe your income and living expenses would be comfortable and stress-free. Why not then pursue the bankruptcy path? In some ways, it is a nuclear option in that the change in your financial and mental health from before and after bankruptcy could be completely changed. And in many cases, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy process can be started and finished in as little as a few months or as long as 6 months. Now, I want to acknowledge the downsides. Yes, a bankruptcy will pull down your credit score. However, your score may be the last of your worries at the moment. Secondly, there may be some times when you're applying for financing and you won't be able to get it. You're probably going to want to think about buying your next car in cash or at least with a large down payment. If you're thinking about getting a job where good credit is required because of the nature of the job, like a job in financial services or where you might have access to confidential information, they may eliminate candidates with a bankruptcy. Keep in mind, having a foreclosure or a debt discharge or a debt settlement are also going to leave you with a blemished credit history. Bankruptcy is also not available to everyone. Depending on how much money you earn and your state's average income levels, you'd have to pass a means test to pursue a bankruptcy anyway. So if you're in a position where you do qualify, you might want to consider it because it's possible that when you get a pay raise or someone else in your household starts making income, that might disqualify you later. It would probably be pretty frustrating to hold off with that option only to find that your efforts to reduce your debt or make more money mean that bankruptcy gets eliminated as an option for you later. You will also have to find a bankruptcy attorney and pay them cash up front. Costs can range from $500 to a few $1,000s. You may see attorneys advertising on TV commercials in your area. Using one of these attorneys can actually be a good plan because it's a service that they specialize in and have streamlined a process that actually saves you money. Remember that you often won't be working with the attorney in the commercial. Usually they have a large network of attorneys in the general area, and one of them will probably be your point of contact. Now, I'm not endorsing bankruptcy as the best option, but because so many people believe that it's a last resort, I've seen too many people working hard, sacrificing endlessly on the inevitable path to bankruptcy anyway. I understand that you may feel obligated to make good on arrangements that you agreed to, but in some cases, like if you've borrowed money from friends or family, it may allow you to get back to solid financial ground and repay those debts to the people that you care about even faster. As I said, I put this course together to get you out of debt as fast as possible, not pay back every debt as fast as possible. If there are rules and tools available to you, I encourage you to consider them, even if you make a different decision than someone else in your exact same position. Now, bankruptcy might be a good solution if you're generally overwhelmed with a lot of debts. But if it's primarily a mortgage or a home that's causing the problem, you might be able to pursue a solution just to address that. Many homes are still worth less than the mortgage balance, what we call underwater. This makes it nearly impossible to sell a home since the owner would need to make up the difference. If this is the case for you, you might want to consider a short sale. A short sale means that the house will sell for less than what you owe on it, but you may be off the hook for the balance. This is easier said than done. You have to initiate the arrangement with your lender, who will evaluate what they can do. Then you'll have to list the house for sale and find a buyer, and the lender will have to approve the sale. This process can easily take a year or longer to complete, so it's not necessarily a quick fix. Foreclosure, while you might not have a choice, could be a solution too. Foreclosure is when the lender takes the home after payments are missed. If you can't sell it or short sell it, a foreclosure could at least free you from the mortgage payments. You'll need to find an alternative place to live, but you can initiate a voluntary foreclosure by contacting your lender and telling them that you can't pay, so that you don't continue to spend money on payments that will never be enough to keep your home. Foreclosures affect your credit history pretty dramatically and can lower your score by 100 points. But the good news is, if you have significant equity in your home, once the bank forecloses and recovers what they are owed, any excess that's left is due back to you. So we've covered a lot of options for eliminating debt faster, but you want to use only what's appropriate for your situation. You need to determine where you're at. Are things manageable, difficult to manage, or impossible to manage? So far, the process has been similar for everyone. We've inventoried our debts, sought out the best possible terms, we've reviewed our budget, and are working on balancing our income and spending. But this week is where your plans might take a different route. If you're able to make your minimum payments and then some, or if you're looking to maximize your efforts, then using a payoff strategy is probably your best option to break free from debt. Now, if you're struggling or barely getting by, if you feel like you could find balance if your payments were a bit more affordable or consistent, and some help or cooperation would make all the difference, then consider those options like debt management. And if you're overwhelmed, behind and falling further behind, your best bet might be to pursue more complete options like settlement or bankruptcy. And no matter where you stand right now, no matter how much debt you have, you can get beyond it. Like Kathleen, who paid off $8,000 in 90 days, or the people who paid off $89,000, or $158,000, or $200,000 in 2 years. It is possible, and you can be free of debt. So let's get started right now. I showed you earlier how to use the Accelerate Debt Reduction worksheet because this is a great place to start. This is all you need to start using the money momentum paydown method right now. But you'll also notice that one column is still blank, the final payment date. While we don't need it, I do want to show you how to get this information. I've attached a spreadsheet to this module, the Money Momentum Calculator. You can use this to manage your debts if you like, but it will provide us with some really exciting information. It'll tell us when we'll be done with our debts. Here's how to use it. In the top box, enter today's date. This is so it'll calculate the future dates correctly. Then, enter in each of your debts in the creditor information table, the name of the debt, your current balance left, the interest rate that's being charged, and the required minimum monthly payment. Below that, where it says total monthly payment, enter the total amount that you're going to pay towards your debts each month. This should include all of the minimum payments in addition to any extra money that you've freed up from your spending. Once you enter this, the amount below it should be equal to the extra amount that you're dedicated to paying off these debts. Now below that, in the Strategy drop-down menu, select Snowball, lowest balance first. Then, in the section below that, you should see each of those debts listed. And now you'll also see how many months it'll be before each one is paid off, and the month and year when you'll make your last payment towards each of those. Take the final payment date from your Money Momentum Calculator spreadsheet, the month and the year, and enter them in the final column on your worksheet. I added this because I thought it would be a great reminder of when we'll be free from each debt. Now you can look forward to each of these dates because you'll know that a debt has been paid off. And depending on your situation, you might be surprised how quickly some of them are gone and how soon you'll be crossing some of them off of your list. So use the Money Momentum Calculator spreadsheet to complete your Accelerate Debt Reduction worksheet. Refer to the second page of the worksheet for some of the other programs that we discussed today, if they're the right solution for you. We've covered a lot of information and have some detailed work to do. You're in the final steps, so congratulations on getting this far. You're one step closer to breaking free for good.